Darrell Waltrip returned to the Fox Sports booth this weekend here at Bristol. Darrell, we're going to talk more about the Gibbs and Sam Mayer fight, and charters are expected to go for $15 million and maybe more. What's going on, guys? It's Daniel, and welcome back to another video. We've got a ton of NASCAR and other motorsports stories discussed here today on the channel. Let's go ahead and just jump straight into those really quickly. We're going to go ahead and start with paint schemes and sponsorship news. First, let's jump into those really quickly. We've only got one paint scheme to look at. It hasn't been officially released, but it is Kurt Busch's 2022 McDonald's scheme. This paint scheme looks really good in my opinion. It's been a T scheme, but it's going to be out really soon here in the near future. It's a really nice looking paint scheme. I've loved the McDonald's schemes that Bubba Wallace has had, and I actually think this paint scheme is just a little bit better than the Bubba Wallace scheme. Not saying the Bubba Wallace scheme is bad, but I think it's actually a scheme. But this paint scheme is really nice looking. They did a really awesome and a great job on it, and I'm looking forward to seeing it on the racetrack throughout the 2022 season. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about the Darlington Cup Series race, as it has the title sponsor once again, and it will be Goodyear who will be sponsoring the race for the second year in a row. Goodyear sponsored the Darlington Throwback race last year in the spring, and once again they'll be sponsoring here. They'll also have that white, the grayish or whitish tire that they've had in the past as the tire they're going to use. So that's really awesome to see, and good to see that Goodyear is continuing their entitlement and work with the company and with the track as well. Really exciting news for sure, and I'm glad to see that Goodyear is still stepping up to the plate and sponsoring another race. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about Canary Ogata. As Canary Ogata did something really cool as he won a late model race, I believe on Friday night or Saturday evening at Hickory Speedway. He says that he is believed to be the first Japanese driver to win a race at a late model race or a race in the United States. This is absolutely incredible. He's the first driver to win a late model race, a stock car race, maybe in the history. I'm not entirely sure. We'd have to go back and fact check that. But I think it's really awesome that Canary Ogata was able to do this. I know the guy's not been amazing in NASCAR, but for him to go out to Hickory and win is really cool. Seeing shows he does have quite a bit of talent. Again, he's jumped into NASCAR, hasn't done great, but it's good to see that he was able to go out there and win and go race there. Very exciting to see, and again, really happy to see that Canary Ogata was able to go out there and win. Really exciting news for sure. And now we'll go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about Josh Berry. As Josh Berry competed in a Cars Tour race this past Saturday, and he won the good per year 225 cars race at Greenville Pickett Speedway this past Saturday. Josh Berry, of course, we know is currently driving the car for Junior Motorsports. It also is a really awesome late model racer, and every time he goes and race late models, it seems like he's either going to win or be a contender to win races. This does not shock me. But it's really exciting at the same time to see that Josh Berry can still go out there and race at a local level and go out there and win. So huge congratulations to Josh Berry on picking up the victory. Absolutely well deserved, and congratulations on picking up the victory here at Greenville Pickens. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about Hendrick Motorsports. As during the NASCAR Cup Series race at Martinsville, Hendrick Motorsports made history as they became the first team to lead 10,000 laps at a single track. They, on Saturday night, surpassed the record, which no one has ever done, where they became the first team to lead 10,000 laps at a single track, which, of course, is Martinsville. Now, we know that Hendrick Motorsports is a really good organization, but to be the first Cup Series team to lead 10,000 laps at a single track is absolutely amazing. And, of course, Hendrick Motorsports has won 27 times at the track, which I believe is more than any other organization in the history. So it's not a major surprise when Hendrick Motorsports made history, but it is very incredible to see that Hendrick Motorsports continues to make history and make good things happen. And congratulations, Hendrick Motorsports, on making history here on Saturday evening. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about Bubba Paul. Now, Bubba Paul competed in, I think, a late model race. I think one of the big late model races at Five Flags Speedway. And he was able to win. I think he was able to win or finish in the top 5. But because of how well he run in that race, or I think he actually won it, but because I think he won that race, he will not have to basically get the fan vote at Nationals. Now, he is going to race in the SRX race at Five Flags Speedway. This is something I'm very excited for. Bubba Paul is one of the legends of the late model scene, and he absolutely deserves this opportunity and deserves an opportunity to race in the SRX. The guy is absolutely, I think, going to kick ass in that Five Flags Speedway race. I really believe he's going to. So I think he's a very talented and a very gifted driver. When you look at a lot of drivers in Cup Series, they kind of look up to Bubba Paul card, so I think it's really cool to see, and he deserves the opportunity. I think he absolutely is going to be a contender, of course. I think some of those drivers who are like really good at late model racing and stuff, and some of those guys in the S-Series are probably going to contend, but for him to compete against some of the greatest legends in racing history, I think is absolutely awesome, man. Congratulations to Bubba Paul on getting the opportunity to race in the S-Series. Really exciting news for sure. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about the F1 TV contract. Now, we kind of talked about F1's TV contract this past weekend on Friday, but there was more that came out later on Friday. And basically, Adam Stern reports that ESPN's current intention is to continue to run F1 races without ads if it is able to secure a renewal with Liberty Media from 2023. Still, the situation is worth watching, as at a certain price, it could get hard for any network to go commercial-free going forward. Now, if you've been following the recent reports that we talked about this last week on the channel, basically, their asking price has gone up drastically. It's gone from an asking price of $5 million up to $75 million for the F1 contract. Now, one of the biggest things that's been in question is, are commercials going to be added to F1 contract or not? Because the last 4 or 5 years, if you watch Formula 1, there's been no commercial. They have the Sky Sports guys do the coverage, and there's been no commercials throughout the races. And if you watch it, it's the only series that doesn't have commercials throughout the races. They don't even go side by side. They don't have commercials throughout the races. And because of how F1 has grown here, especially in the United States, they're going to try to commercialize it. If I'm Formula One, I definitely try to at least go back to ESPN and try to at least for 2023 have no commercials in your coverage. That's one thing I think a lot of people are going to be upset with, is because the one thing F1's gotten right is there's been no commercials. So that's one thing I'm really, really hoping that does not end up happening. I couldn't be wrong if things do end up happening for that, but I really hope and pray that ESPN gets it back so there are no commercials for the events. I really hope that's the case. I feel like there's a chance that even if they get it back, there could be commercials still, but I really hope with F1's TV contract, because again, Liberty Media has been really growing Formula 1. It's really been great to see Formula 1's growth. I'm not sure how the ratings are going to be when they get revealed either today or tomorrow, but I think it's very exciting to see. It's not the greatest thing if commercials do come in, but it's interesting. You get a lot of companies that are interested. NBC's interested. I think Fox interested, and there's a couple other media people that are interested. So we'll wait and see what happens in regards to that, but we'll see if commercials do get added to Formula 1 coverage going forward. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we are talking about Sheldon Creed. Now, if you watched the NASCAR Xfinity Series race, there was a report that came out later after the race, and I'm really surprised the broadcast ever picked this up. But Bob Paul reported that Sheldon Creed's crew chief, Jeff Stankiewicz, the car chief, and the engineer are expected to be suspended for 4 races for the tungsten in the car falling out. Tungsten is very, very heavy and very, very dangerous. If you run into that, you're probably going to damage your car really, really bad. Now, again, I'm very surprised that it was a reporter that had to put this out. Shout out to Bob Pockers for this, but I'm very surprised and shocked that it took a reporter to put this out and not the broadcast to pick this up. But at the same token, at the same time, it is very well deserved. The penalty, you can't have the tungsten fall out of the car, and it's a rule that you have to have. So no surprise and no shock to me that there's going to be big penalties. It hasn't been officially announced, but when the penalties do get revealed, we're probably going to see someone in the team most likely. I'm not sure, because the car chief's not going to get in there, so probably one of the engineers is probably going to end up getting in there. So we'll have to wait and see what happens, but there's big penalties coming for Sheldon Creed. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we are talking about Norm Benning. As Norm Benning officially revealed on Sunday that he is going to be returning to the NASCAR Camping World Truck Series this weekend at Bristol Dirt. Yes, you heard that right. Norm Benning is making his official return. I do not believe he's made an attempt to race at all in 2022. Due to the nose confinements on the trucks and the nose changes and the body changes, he's not been able to compete in the truck series. So he is going to be back this weekend in the number 6. He's got Circle B diecast on the car, which I think is really exciting that they're partnering up with him. And it's really awesome that Norm Benning is going to come back. And I think it's a perfect race for him to come back. And I know a lot of people are going to say, well, Norm Benning's probably going to struggle. If you see Norm Benning on dirt, he's been pretty good. In fact, he got through a last chance qualifier in 2013 and was able to make the event. And they had a ton of people and teams come through and help him out. So I am very excited to see that Norm Benning is coming back in the team. I'm very pumped to see that he's making his return, and he absolutely deserves the opportunity to come back. So congratulations to Norm Benning, and congrats to him on making his official return to the NASCAR Camping World Truck Series. Well deserved, in my opinion. Congratulations to Norm Benning. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we are going to talk about Bristol dirt windshields. Now, there's been a lot of talk and discussion about if there's going to be a new implementation of windshields or if there are going to be changes to the windshields for Bristol dirt. It was reported by Bob Pockrass on Friday that NASCAR's evaluation of removing windshields during Friesen's test Wednesday at Bristol, they said at this time, NASCAR will keep the windows installed for Bristol dirt. There were some benefits to removing to a screen, but significant unknowns around safety and hurdles for implementation for next week is why they decided to go with the traditional windshields. I am absolutely not surprised that they've decided to go with this. Again, one of the biggest things with this screen is so that dust and mud and that stuff and those particles don't get on top of the car. And that's one thing that we're really talking about is maybe some changes in regards to that. That's one thing they were testing, and one of the only changes they probably were going to make if they were going to make any changes. That being said, though, I do like that NASCAR did make a decision. Yes, I do think the screen stuff would have been really, really cool to have. But at the same token, at the same time, I really understand where NASCAR is coming from right here in regards to that. So, good decision from NASCAR, in my opinion. I know a lot of people probably disagree with me on that, but I think it is a great decision that they did decide to go with that, and I do hope maybe we'll see maybe launchers, maybe other changes, but I think NASCAR did right here make a good decision in regards to that. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we are talking about Dale Jr. As Dale Jr., after the NASCAR Xfinity Series race, he talked about his contact with Josh Berry to Bob Pockrass. Probably one of the most popular upvoted NASCAR tweets I've seen in a very, very long time, nearly 10,000 likes on Bob Pockrass' tweet. But Dale Jr. talked about it and basically was very sarcastic and basically was really, really funny to listen to. He's like, I basically ran corner, Bob, and over Joe. Did you see that there wasn't contact? What did you think about it? Dale Jr. is absolutely fun to listen to, not just only in the broadcast booth, of course, making his one-off return. We'll actually get into Dale more in regards to Dale Jr., and he may be making another start, by the way, which we'll get into that later in this video. But Dale Jr. at this time was making his only start as of now, and basically ended up finishing 11th, and has some contact with Josh Berry. Then there's been some basically revenge where Josh Berry got into the back of Dale Jr. to find out because there was a braking contest between Jeremy Cluntz and Josh Berry, where basically they got into Dale Jr., and Jr. was not very happy about that on the radio from what we could tell. That being said, though, it's fun to listen to Dale Jr. talk about his driver. And Josh Berry is a great driver, don't get me wrong. Josh Berry probably could have contended for the victory in this race, but he was making quite a few mistakes. And I think a win is definitely coming for Josh Berry in the near future. That being said, though, it was just so fun to see that Dale Jr. was back. You could tell, really, the crowd, especially for the event, was really awesome to see. And I think a lot of that crowd, it was one of the most filled up crowds for an Xfinity Series race in a long time. And a lot of that, of course, was due to Dale Jr. being out there. So, really excited to see that for sure, and see that Dale Jr. came back and race was really, really great. And I'm happy to see that Dale Jr. was able to make his return. And now we'll go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we are talking about the game. Now, we're going to talk about the Ty Gibbs and Sam Mayer fight. The game made an interesting take here the last couple of days. I think it came out a couple of days. I believe he deleted the take, but the No Jumper group put out a tweet talking about the game where he basically compared the Ty Gibbs and Sam Mayer fight to what happened at the Oscars about the 10-year ban, or basically said something like white privilege. I'm not entirely sure. I can't remember exactly what he said in the tweet. I can't really say it. But basically compared what happened at a NASCAR race and a NASCAR fight to what happened at the Oscars. Let me put this into perspective in exactly how bad this take is from the game. There have been fights throughout NASCAR history. You can go all the way back to the 60s and the 70s, and probably the 50s, and there were fights happening in NASCAR. Fights have been part of NASCAR forever. But for whatever reason, people look at what happened in the Oscars, and they have to compare everything. So apparently there's no fights, and apparently there can't be fights at hockey because the game's probably going to make a take like that or a tweet like that. Apparently you can't have fights in the NBA or NFL because if you get into fights, apparently boxing, there's no issues right there. And then you bring other factors in. It's just like, what is the game on about here? This is such a clown take, and honestly probably the worst take I've seen this year when it comes to something related to NASCAR. Are we seriously comparing a NASCAR fight to what happened at the Oscars, which, by the way, security should have been there to stop Will Smith from slapping Chris Rock? I do not understand why in the world he decided to compare that. Just such a bad take. I don't think the game is an idiot, but it's like, dude, you're smarter than that. You know better than that, and you know that you're full of crap right there. So, in my opinion, I don't really understand where the game is coming from. I think he's stupid in this take, and in my opinion, his take is really, really bad, in my honest opinion. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Austin Dillon. As Austin Dillon is expected to compete for Young's Motorsports in the Camping World Truck Series race later this week at Bristol. He will drive the number 20 for Young's Motorsports. Austin, of course, is coming off a very, very strong run this past weekend at Martinsville, finishing in third position. It ran really, really well in that. And making his first start on the Truck Series, I believe, in a couple years. I think the last time he raced in the Truck Series was 2018 or 2019. And it'll be, as of now, the third Cup driver who will be competing in the Bristol Truck Series race. Of course, Joey Logano will be driving the 54 for DGR Racing. And then we're also going to see Harrison Burton driving the 17 truck for DGR Racing. He'll be joining to try to get some experience for that Bristol Dirt Cup Series race. Austin Dillon, I think he actually has a pretty decent shot to win. I know the Young's Motorsports trucks have not been generally fast, but if I think anyone, especially since I think this race is going to be an equalizer, and Austin Dillon has, by the way, won a dirt race back in 2013 at Eldora, so if there's anyone that probably could get into one of those trucks and do very, very well, I think Austin Dillon is a guy that really can do it, and he does dirt racing outside of NASCAR too, so it really isn't a big surprise that he's running this event. Now, my question is how many other Cup guys are going to run the Truck Series race at Bristol Dirt? That's one thing that we're going to have to watch from time to time. That being said, though, I'm very excited to see that Austin Dillon is getting behind the wheel to run a truck. I think he's going to absolutely be a contender for that race, and I'm very excited to see that he's getting back behind the wheel in the 20 truck. I think he'll be a contender. I think he'll be very, very fast, and I think he potentially could win, but we'll have to wait and see what happens if he is a contender or not into that race. But I think he absolutely is going to be a contender, to be honest with you. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about the Australian Grand Prix. Now, of course, right after the Cup Series race, about an hour after the Cup Series race concluded, we had the Formula One race in Australia in Albert Park. And I'll be real, there wasn't much that happened up front. Charles Leclerc put up a dominating clinic, but there was action behind in the race. Carlos Sainz, who qualified 9th, who is a teammate of Charles Leclerc, I believe is coming in this race second or third of the points at the time. He spun out into the gravel track and finished last. Max Verstappen, who was running second at the time, had electrical issues and he basically fell out and finished 18th. Charles Leclerc went on to put a dominating clinic. They were trying to bring him down pit road, and basically he was trying to go down pit road to try to see if he could get the faster lap. And Ferrari basically decided, no, we're going to stay out here and we're going to try to keep the fast lap so we don't think anyone's going to challenge. Ferrari being very, very smart right there, by the way. So looking at that, Charles Leclerc put up a dominating clinic and has now a 34-point lead over George Russell. This is the largest points lead. I think this is a larger points lead, if I'm not mistaken, than what we had even last year. And Charles Leclerc started this year really, really well. He's finished first, second, and first. I think he's a championship contender, and he absolutely deserves a win. Had a dominating day, completed the Grand Slam too. So huge congratulations to Charles Leclerc on picking up the victory right there. He absolutely deserved the victory, was the best car, and congratulations to Charles Leclerc on picking up the victory in the Australian Grand Prix. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about the Long Beach Grand Prix. Now, this of the three big series was probably the best race that happened. The Long Beach Grand Prix looked like it was going to be pretty boring. Colton Herta dominated the early portions of the Long Beach Grand Prix. But as the race progressed, Alex Palou and Joseph Newgarden jumped on the pit strategy and were able to pass Colton Herta on the pit strategy, where Alex Palou had a pretty big gap. Colton Herta would make a major mistake in the race and would crash out, very similar to Nash, where he had the best car at the beginning, but fell back and was starting to catch up. He gets into the outside wall, I believe, in turn 9 or turn 10, and crashes out of the race. Meanwhile, there were a lot of other drivers having problems. Jimmy Johnson, who was really struggling, he had an injury on his arm. He crashed out with Dave Malukas, and then Romain Grosjean really started showing up late. But it would be Joseph Newgarden who would come off the corner and prevail and win his first Long Beach Grand Prix and also pick up, I believe, his 22nd career IndyCar victory. Penske has won all 3 races this year. Scott McLaughlin won the opening race, and Joseph Newgarden has won the last 2 races. It seems like Joseph Newgarden is going to be aiming for a championship. Of course, Joseph Newgarden had challengers. Alex Palou definitely looking really, really strong in this race. And, of course, Romain Grosjean, who probably uses red tires up, unfortunately, a little bit too much to contend for the victory. But I am going to say this, the fact that Joseph Newgarden won this race, I think is absolutely huge and great to see, and absolutely well-deserved victory for Joseph Newgarden. He had to hold off some really fast cars, and he absolutely deserves to win. So congratulations to him on picking up the victory and winning the Long Beach Grand Prix. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about Denny Hamlin and his comments for 2311 Racing. Denny Hamlin was in the media center on Friday, and he was not the happiest camper, to say at the least, when it comes to what happened with 2311 Racing's performance at Richmond. Denny Hamlin says, the win was really exciting until you get out of the car and look down a pylon and say, what the F? What's going on? Says they're working to stop the bleeding with 2311 Racing. It was really talking about the performance with 2311 Racing at Richmond. They had an unacceptable performance at Richmond. Let's be for real. Bubba Paul ran 26 or 20, ended finishing 26 or 27th, and Kirk Busch fell out of the race with reliability issues. Now, 2311 Racing did bounce back in some ways this weekend here at Martinsville. Bubba Paul finished 16, but I think he had a better car than 16. He actually was running, I think, 13 for 14 for that last caution came out in the race and was actually running around top 10 most of the race. But unfortunately, one of the biggest issues was he got a penalty and never really recovered and got a better finish than he did. But he did end up recovering to a top 20, and he really needed that run, all things considered. Kurt Busch ran extremely well. Ran top 10 all race, had one of the fastest cars. Probably should have finished better than he did, had the best car he's had all season, and finished 6th. Meanwhile, Denny Hamlin, the team owner, absolutely struggled and finished 28th in the race and really has not had a good year. But despite having that win, he's really not had a good year in 2022. That being said, though, 2311 really has got to work on performance, especially with Joe Gibbs Racing. But I think in general, you look at Joe Gibbs Racing in general, 2311 was the best team. They really, really were. I know that Kyle Busch got a top 10, but throughout the beginning of the race, besides Christopher Bell, they were absolutely a really good team in this race. And I think that they hopefully will be able to stop this bleeding. And this, I think, could be a turnaround race for the organization. And they really need to turn the season around starting right now. They really need to start getting the season rolling. And I think that this could be the point where things turn around for 2311 Racing. So Denny Hamlin, though, has every right to be frustrated. He wants to see the team flourish. And I don't think it's the drivers. There's been mistakes made on pit road. You look at the issues at Richmond. Bubba Wallace had 2 straight races back then until this race where they had a loose wheel, and then they had the penalty. I think one thing that they need to change on Bubba Wallace's team is the pit crew. Pit crew needs to be swapped up. There need to be changes at that pit crew. So there absolutely needs to be things that need to be fixed with that team. And I think they'll be able to fix these problems, but that's one thing that absolutely needs to be changed is the pit crew for 2311 Racing. I think that is the major issue that's causing the issues. So I hope that's one thing they do look at to fix long term, but we'll wait and see what happens if that's one thing they decide to go with. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Hailie Deegan. Now, this post that she put out on Twitter got a ton of traction and a ton of people talking. She was talking about the length of the races, and she was talking about how these Cup Series races need to be shortened. She said, and Chase Cabrera says that the Cup Series races need to be cut in half. And she also agreed, basically saying, look at this. There's so much downtime in these races, and there's not a lot that happen. Now, this is where I will agree and disagree with her on this. I believe that there should be some races shortened. However, most Cup Series races and all Cup Series races except Crown Jewels should be no less than 400 miles, unless, of course, that race specifically is under 400 miles. But I think no Cup Series race should be over 400 miles. And here's the reason why I believe this to be the case. Look, I am a person that can watch a 500-mile race. But a lot of people nowadays, they do not have the time and the energy to go through and watch a race over 400 miles. And that's one thing, like, for instance, Atlanta, Texas, do those tracks really need to be 500-mile races? No. Those races could be 400 miles, and I think the racing generally would be better. But I will say this. People were not complaining about this really a lot of people were not complaining about this when the racing was good. No one complained about this at Auto Club. That took 4 hours in the race. No one was complaining about Las Vegas. That race took nearly 3.5 to 4 hours. No one was really complaining about the lengths of these races until we had a bad race. And look, Martinsville was not a good race. Do not get me wrong. But at the same token and at the same time, you have to look at this from a different perspective and look at this situation. There's no reason to me that we need to shorten races under 400 miles. I get where they're coming from, and I understand there's a lot of downtime, but there really isn't a lot of downtime. And I think one thing that really could speed up these races a little bit is getting rid of the stages. I think the stages are a big factor. Not rid of stages. Get rid of stage cautions. The stage cautions need to go. Absolutely. I think stage cautions and the competition cautions need to go. You keep the race going. You reduce at least 20, 30 minutes right there, and you get under 3 hours. And by the way, you're sometimes going to have boring races even if you shorten it. Look at Formula 1 this past weekend. I know that they had a short race, but man, that race was absolutely boring. It really was not compelling. It was a pretty boring Formula 1 race. I'm just going to bring that out right there, that not shortening racing does not always equal better racing. Yes, it probably create more urgency because these are stock cars, but that's the thing I will say is that it will not always create more urgency. That's one thing that needs to be brought up. It needs to be brought up to attention there. So, in my honest opinion, I understand where she's coming from, and I understand where Chase is coming from too. But at the same token, at the same time, shortening races too is not going to make better racing. But that's my opinion on that. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Dale Jr. As Dale Jr., this is shout out to my friend, Corvette Racing 48 fan, Jason Albert, who's in a group chat of ours, by the way. He says, it basically posted, Dale Jr. says that he's doing, looks like he'll be doing another race this year in 2022. And according to him, that apparently Homestead is a major possibility for Dale Jr. to do another race. Now, Dale Jr. usually only does one race a year, but it seems like Dale Jr. hasn't really wanted to go back to Homestead and get some redemption and race there. I think Dale Jr. doing another race is huge for a lot of reasons. Number one, it gets another car in the field. That 88 car right now is only planned to run 4 races, but it looks like it's going to run a 5th race. Generally, it only is going to run a few races, so that adds another car in the field, especially for qualified, and get that car a lot of owner's points through the season. Now, of course, they could have guys like Kyle Larson come in and run a few races. They have guys like Chase Elliott come in and run a few races, but I will say this, that having Dale Jr. basically come in and run more races, I think is great for the NASCAR Xfinity Series, and having a Hall of Famer like Dale Jr., they were talking about maybe having a Hall of Fame entry where you have NASCAR Hall of Famers like Jimmy Johnson, like Carl Edwards, like Matt Kenseth, guys that are NASCAR Hall of Famers, having those guys come in and race, I think would be absolutely great to see. But I think Dale Jr. coming back and doing another race like Homestead would be fun to see. Now, of course, well, he would be able to be eligible since it's late in the year. But if that's the one key thing about that is it's during the NBC portion of the year. I think it had to be a little bit earlier in the year, but I think NBC would absolutely grant Dale Jr. It's Dale Jr. Come on. They're going to grant him that opportunity, and they'll grant him that right to go and do that race. So in my opinion, I think Dale Jr. has a really, really good point. I think Dale Jr. should come back and run more races, and I really do hope that Dale Jr. decides to come back and run some more races here in the near future. He's a great driver for the sport, a great ambassador for the sport, and I do hope that Dale Jr. does come back in races here in NASCAR in the near future in the NASCAR Xfinity Series. Now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about Kyle Busch's really strong comments against dirt racing. Now, Kyle Busch is speaking to the media, and he says that he agrees with Richard Petty that dirt takes our sport backwards. Says he's ready to cut the cord on the attempt to go dirt racing, and includes the attempt on Bristol dirt. Now, here's my take on the Bristol dirt idea. I honestly like the Bristol dirt idea, but I do not agree with him on the idea of removing dirt racing from the NASCAR Cup Series schedule in general. I'll tell you exactly why. I think dirt racing is really, really good. It's a good way to challenge drivers. I think having dirt racing for NASCAR is a really, really great way to challenge drivers and show their skills on the dirt tracks. And I think it'd be really, really good. But I will say that if I had to choose between having the Bristol dirt race and then having, of course, another racetrack where, we could see another dirt track, I would honestly move the Bristol race to a track like Eldora, like a true dirt track, like or even I-55 Raceway, or a track like, well, I-55 is too short and there's rain issues there, but you do have that going on where you could have a track like Eldora, you could have a track that Kyle Larson runs, or even run at other tracks across the country if you wanted the opportunity, like Volusia. Maybe that's where you could have NASCAR run, but one of the biggest things, the reason why Bristol became a dirt race, the spring race did, is because of the fact that the spring race was not getting a lot of attendance. There was a lot of attendance issues, and that's a big reason why NASCAR decided to go ahead and basically have the dirt race there, and that's why they basically decided to do that. So, in my honest and sincere opinion, I absolutely don't 100% agree with Kyle Busch right there on the getting rid of dirt racing in general, but I would say if I had to choose between having a dirt race at Bristol or having a dirt race at another track, I would honestly be fine with them moving the dirt race from Bristol to another track. But I 100% understand the decision from SMI why they decided to do that. And I will give them that's one thing SMI think that worked out very, very well. And I was honestly really happy how when I know there was rain issues and there could still be rain issues, that's one thing we're still going to be watching throughout these next couple weeks. But I will say Kyle Busch does have a very interesting in regards to Bristol dirt, and maybe we'll see more of that in the future. But I do agree with Kyle Busch that maybe he should go another track. But same token, we should not get rid of Bristol dirt going forward. Again, Kyle Busch has a very strong and interesting comments, say at least, about Bristol dirt, in my opinion. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about Brad Keselowski. Now, we know at this point that Brad Keselowski did lose the appeal, but wondering exactly what violation that Brad Keselowski did. We may have exactly found out what Brad Keselowski did, and Brad Keselowski spoke to the media in regards to the violation. He says that he repaired the tail panel because they didn't have a new one and felt like both sides are right and wrong in their view of the violation. Now, I understand. Well, here's the thing that I can tell why they probably repaired the new one, because they probably have a part shortage. And the one thing, though, you're not supposed to do with this is you're not supposed to touch the spec parts or even mess up parts. Even if you're repairing the parts that NASCAR doesn't agree with, you're not allowed to touch those spec parts. It's in the NASCAR rule. That's one of the gray areas. And that's why they received the massive, massive penalty. And he understands NASCAR's decision, but they didn't feel like they wanted to get a new one, and so they wanted to go ahead and repair that. Well, that probably created a massive, massive aero advantage for the team and probably helped them have a really, really strong run. Now, NASCAR, of course, has not released the official statement. They're most likely going to release it here in the next couple of days. In fact, they're probably going to release their findings most likely tomorrow. But I will say that I do agree that there probably should have been penalty out, but maybe the same token, get the part shortage issue fixed. Again, there still is a massive shortage problem. Look, NASCAR definitely is in the right because you're not supposed to mess with the spec parts, but Brad Keselowski is also in the right in some areas, in some aspects, because, again, what he did was basically they repaired a piece. And again, you're not supposed to, even if you're repairing it, because it could mess with some of the component stuff. But I'm really also kind of shocked that was not picked up in the laser inspection. You would think that they would have picked that up in a laser technical inspection, right? You would probably think that they would pick that up. I'm kind of surprised that it was not picked up in the laser technical inspection, but that's one thing I'm going to go back to talking about, kind of circle back to, is basically they need to get the shortage situation sorted out. It's ridiculous that there is a part shortage problem. And the fact that there is a part shortage problem still is frustrating, and it needs to get sorted out. It's probably why they had to repair it. They probably didn't feel like they had needed one. They ran out of tail panels because they got involved in multiple wrecks throughout the year so far and stuff, and they probably didn't have a new one they probably could use for a track like this. So that's one thing that I hope that does get fixed soon, is the part shortage problem, but we'll wait and see what happens in regards to that going forward, to be honest with you. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about driver reactions to Martinsville's race. Now, if you watched the NASCAR Cup Series race at Martinsville, you probably watched a pretty boring race. I'm going to be real. This race was not very good, but there have been a ton of theories around why this race at Bristol Dirt was not very good. And a lot of drivers had some very interesting theories around it. Here's some interesting drivers' comments. We have quite a few drivers' comments from the race. William Byron says that the tracks did not lay down rubber, and that was really due to the cold temperatures. The temperatures were extremely cold, and they did not lay down rubber. That's one theory that William Byron brought up. Ryan Blaney says that the left sides don't wear on this car, and basically because they brought a bigger tire, the left sides probably did not wear. Maybe they could bring a softer tire going forward, is what he's saying. Cole Custer says that it was aerotight, and Brad Keselowski also talked about as well, that there was aerotight on the car and was very, very difficult to pass. I'm very shocked by that there's aero in this car at short tracks, but he says that there was aerotightness on the car. Denny Hamlin says there really isn't one solution and one main issue. There's multiple issues, and NASCAR has to go back to the drawing board, which I agree with him there. And finally, Kevin Harvick says that the gear ratios are a big thing that really made to happen there, and there's also shifting in this race as well. Now, here's where I think what exactly went wrong with Martinsville and what happened. So, I think all race drivers are absolutely correct. I think with the cold temperatures and stuff, the track did not lay down rubber. There was no rubber on the track, any little rubber buildup, and there was not a lot of tire fall off in this race because there was a lack of rubber. I think one of the biggest things, of course, was very, very cold, and was very, very cold out of track, especially like Martinsville, where it's barely, I think it was like 39 or 40 degrees when the race started, and it actually had snow, and there was snow and sleet on the track. It probably washed off all the rubber before the race even happened. And going back to 2018 as well, the spring race. The 2018 race did not get a really, really good, was not a very good race either. You go back to that, it was very lack of passing. Why was that the case? Because it was really, really cold, and there was lack of rubber on the track. When you don't have rubber on the track, you can't create multi-grooves, and everybody stays single file. I think the shifting also played a major factor into this race not being as competitive as it was because of shifting, because again, you have to shift. There's a lot of shifting around the track, and I think that's one thing NASCAR could do is with the gear ratio. I think the gear ratios are playing a factor into the shifting. I think that's one thing that they could fix right there. Also, I think bringing a better tire and a tire that wears out a lot earlier could create better racing as well. I think the lack of fall off on the tire is another issue, and Goodyear probably brought a harder tire, but I don't think they expected it to be as cold as it was. And I think that they probably would have thought it was going to be a little warmer than it was, but it was extremely cold to race. And they were not predicting snow and rain was going to hit the track on Saturday. The predictions were it was going to hit on Friday, which it absolutely did, which we're going to get into Friday in a little bit, by the way. But I think there are things that NASCAR could fix. I think that they will have time, and apparently there's talk that there may be an organizational test that's happening in Martinsville maybe later this year, and maybe they can go back to the drawing board and fix those issues. But I do think one of the biggest factors was the cold temperatures. I think that was the number one big factor. So NASCAR's probably going to go back to the drawing board at some point, and they'll probably try to figure out what exactly went wrong in this race, and I think they'll be able to figure it out. I can trust NASCAR when it comes to this, and I think they will go back to the drawing board and fix these problems. And now we're going to jump on to the first of three major stories in today's episode, as we're going to talk about charters. Now, it was reported by Adam Stern on Friday that he says that the next NASCAR charter that's sold is currently projected to go for at least $15 million per industry sources, which would be another record price. Among that teams that continue to explore their charter options is Junior Motorsports. Now, we talked last week on the channel about Junior Motorsports and them potentially jumping into the NASCAR Cup Series here in the next year or so. But one of the biggest things that's been really holding Junior Motorsports back is because they do not have a charter currently at the moment. And charters, like I said, are going through the roof. And I'm really surprised that they're becoming more expensive. I believe the record price for charters when 23XI bought the charter from Starcom, which I think was like $13.4 million, something like that. It was really, really expensive. And I thought the prices were actually going to go down because Penny GMS, they got their charters for like $10 million. So I'm very surprised that charters are still going up right now, and they're costing as much. But again, charters have a ton of value, and that's one thing that I think is going to prevent a team like Junior Motorsports from potentially jumping up to the Cup Series. But I think Dale Jr.'s got $15 million from his team to be available to jump up. But does he want to put all those $15 million into resources of the new car, or does he want to wait until he gets more money, until the charter money goes down? Now, I think long-term, we're going to see the charter prices go down. I believe they're going to go down from $15 million down to like $10 million, even like $6 or $7 million. But I think because there's some teams like Junior Motorsports that are still exploring it, I think those prices are going up. And it wouldn't shock me if there's other teams like the Money Team and NY Racing among other organizations that are looking to try to get some charters. So very interesting for sure. Again, I'm very shocked and very surprised that charters are going through the roof right now. And you've got other teams that are probably trying to expand to get another charter. You've got 23XI Racing right now that's looking to expand. You've got rumors that we've had talk about it, at JTG, there have been rumors for a little bit that they were going to shut down at some point. There's been also talk that they may go ahead and expand next year here. And there's been a lot of teams that are still looking to expand. I think the Cup Series field is actually going to expand. I don't think charters long term are going to matter as much. Now, one thing to remember is that the charter agreement right now only goes through 2024. So there is talk and discussion that there won't be charters until a new engine package comes in, which of course is 2024. There's a lot of talk that there's going to be a new engine configuration coming, and there's also talk of a new manufacturer coming in as well. And that's when they said it may not expand, because right now they're not planning to expand the amount of charters in the field, but instead if a new manufacturer comes in, they may not only increase the field size, but also increase how many charters could get into the field. So this charter situation is something that we're still going to be watching throughout this year. There's rumors of expansions. 23XI Racing, I know they want to expand going into next year. And there's other teams that want to work on maybe selling their organizations going forward. So this one story that we're going to be watching throughout this year to see if things happen throughout. But the charter situation is definitely one thing to watch. And we'll see if there's more that comes out through this charter situation going forward, to be honest with you. And now we're going to jump on to the first of two major stories of today's episode, as we're going to talk more about the Sam Mayer and Ty Gibbs fight. Now, we talked about the Sam Mayer and Ty Gibbs fight after the NASCAR Xfinity Series race took place. And if you watched the NASCAR Xfinity Series race, you saw a fight that ended up taking place between Sam Mayer and Ty Gibbs. Right after checker flag flew, we saw Sam Mayer push Ty Gibbs up the racetrack, and Ty Gibbs got into the wall. And instead of winning the race, or finishing second and winning the Dash or Cash, he ended up finishing, I believe, 7th or 8th in the race and getting very, very upset. He ran into the back, Ty Gibbs we're talking about, ran into the back of Sam Mayer. They got a ton of damage. They went to pit road. Ty Gibbs was extremely pissed off at Sam Mayer, still had his helmet on, and they still had their helmets on at the time. Then Sam Mayer went back to talk to him and confront him after it, and then there started to be some pushes and shoves. Then Ty Gibbs threw the first hook and punched at Sam Mayer's face with his helmet on, and we saw a big brawl ensue. An official did end up getting injured in the fight. Unfortunately, the official, as of now, was released in the hospital and is basically still going to have to go and get checked out from time to time to see if he's okay, but it seems like he was released. Now, during that fight and stuff, there was definitely a lot of controversy around it because, of course, Ty Gibbs had his helmet on. Can we ask one question? Why keep your helmet on during the fight? At least when you're going to get into a fight in NASCAR, take your helmet off. Now, of course, people bring up O'Kell Yarborough and Donnie Allison. They still had their helmets on. Well, they still had open face helmets on. These are closed face helmets, and he had his helmet on. And a lot of people don't like the actions of Ty Gibbs. And Ty Gibbs has basically said, I don't really care what people think about me. I'm going to race aggressive. Well, he was very hypocritical in this race for sure. He was very, very upset. Now, going into the sides, they actually went to the hauler after the race. Ty Gibbs already was at the hauler for basically not following the NASCAR rules. He was already at the hauler in this race. Now, looking at the situation in regards to this stuff, it says they shook hands afterwards, but I really believe there's going to be more issues between these two. These two have had a rivalry in the past. Now, the guy who runs the operations, race director Wayne Auden, he did say that they are going to be looking into it, but they did say it runs clear if there are penalties going to be ensued. Now, I'm not sure if there are going to be penalties in regards to points, but I definitely could see a fine coming in this situation. Now, usually when it comes to fights, they don't really ban or fine any drivers in the situation. But I will say this, because an official did get injured, there is a very big possibility that there could be some major fines coming. Well, not major fines, but at least there. But Sam Mayer did go to social media the other day, I think after the Xfinity race, and he did apologize for that official getting injured. Ty Gibbs has not responded to that, by the way. Here's my take on it. Ty Gibbs is a very talented driver. I think he's a great driver, and he's a future Cup Series champion, in my opinion. But Ty Gibbs, though actually is not going to make him friends and is not going to make him fans. In fact, there were people at the track where the green flag even dropped that said that Ty Gibbs was getting a ton of boos. Boos are almost louder than Kyle Busch when he gets boos. When Kyle Busch gets boos, he got almost louder boos than that. And Ty Gibbs just needs to play that part of the villain at this point. And Joe, his grandfather who runs the team, really does not want him to be that bad boy driver. And I think Ty doesn't want to be that bad boy driver, but his actions really speak for themselves. And he's a young driver who has a ton of talent. But he's got a lot to learn. And like I said a few minutes ago, if you're going to get into a fight, take your helmet off when you get into a fight. Absolutely ridiculous. You keep your helmet on. You look kind of like a pussy if you keep your helmet on. But one thing I will say is this fight got a lot of media attention. Bleacher Report was talking about this. I know that Pat McAfee basically was talking about this. Major media outlets, ESPN was talking about this fight. This is definitely the biggest thing that happened over the weekend was this fight between Sam Mayer and Ty Gibbs. Now, I want to make this very, very clear. I love fights and stuff, so it was great to see this fight got as much attention as it did, and it really could help grow the sport here going into the future. So, really awesome to see. I mean, the fight wasn't the greatest thing in the world, but at the same token, this first fight we've seen this year, and man, who would have thought Ty Gibbs would be getting into a scuffle with Sam Mayer? Who would have thought that? I mean, these two are hot young shot drivers who are really trying to prove themselves. So, very crazy story for sure, and crazy that both of them got into a fight. We'll wait to see what happens if there are any major penalties that come out from it. And now we're going to jump on to the final major story of today's episode as we're talking about Darrell Waltrip. Now, it was announced during the Fox broadcast. It was revealed by Mike Organ, who works, I think, for the Tennessean. It was reported that Darrell Waltrip is officially going to be returning to the Fox Sports booth this weekend at Bristol Dirt. This will be the first time that Darrell Waltrip will be commentating in the Fox Sports booth since 2019 when he retired from full-time being in the booth, and he retired after 2019. He did have a one-off appearance at Bristol Dirt, not the Bristol All-Star Race in 2020, during the All-Star Race when they had moved to Bristol due to the COVID pandemic, and they moved it over there. But this will be the first time Darrell Waltrip will be officially back in the Fox Sports booth as a commentator. Now, I'm going to be for real here. I'm kind of nervous about this for a couple of reasons, because not only are you going to have Clint Boyer in the booth this weekend, but you're going to have Darrell Waltrip. And both of them are well-known to be kind of people who can be very, very clowny, and it could try to be the comedy carried here. And I feel like there could be some bashing ads between Clint Bowyer and Darrell Waltrip, but there also may not be some bashing ads between Darrell Waltrip and Clint Bowyer. Maybe they're going to gel it together very, very well. But I'm very nervous that we're going to see a lot of stupidity in this broadcast. Now, do not get me wrong. I love the fact that Darrell Waltrip, at least for this race, is back in the Fox Swift. I just wish he was back from the Darlington throwback race, where the three of them, Darrell Waltrip, Lenny McDonald's, Mike Joy, would be in there. I'm kind of shocked he's not in for that one here in a couple weeks. But I will say I am definitely happy that Darrell Waltrip is back. I'm just very nervous to see he's going to be in the booth with Clint Bowyer. They don't both bring always most intellectual stuff, but I think Darrell Waltrip will probably bring a little more intellectual stuff. But again, he hasn't been in these cars in nearly 20-something years, so he really is not going to exactly know what he's talking about. But I will say I love the rotation that they've had throughout this year. They've had Tony Stewart in for a couple weeks, and I'm kind of shocked Tony Stewart isn't in the booth this week, considering he's the dirt guy. He's a great dirt racer, and I'm kind of shocked he's not in there, and I think he would have done really, really good here. Matt Kenseth's been in the booth once this year at Auto Club. Danica's the only one I really have not been a fan of this year in the booth. She was in the booth for 2 weeks at Vegas and Phoenix. Then he had Jeff Gordon in Atlanta. Then he had Tony back at Circuit Americas. And then the last couple weeks, you've had Chad Knaus. And Chad Knaus, I think, has been one of the better ones we've had so far. I just think Fox has done a really, really good job there. But I think it is cool that Darrell Waltrip, at least for one race, is coming back to commentate in the Fox roof. I think he'll bring some intellect. He's braced on dirt in the past, too. And again, really cool to see Darrell Waltrip, at least, is coming back in the booth. I'm just worried this broadcast could become a major, major chaotic fest. And of course, this weekend is the Bristol Dirt Race, which is on Easter Sunday. The first in the Cup Series is racing on Easter in a very, very long time. So don't get me wrong. I like Darrell Waltrip. I think he's had moments. He was a great commentator really up until near the end of his tenure. But I will say having him in the booth, at least for just one race, is fine. I can deal with Darrell Waltrip in the booth for one race. I probably could not deal with him for a whole season because, again, Darrell Waltrip is in his 70s now. He's almost in his 80s now at this point. I think he's like 75 years old right now. But I will say having Darrell Waltrip at least in the booth for one off race, and it's on Easter too. He's a Christian, of course. I think it's really cool to see at least in the booth for one more. I'm just really nervous that Darrell Waltrip may cause some issues in the booth. That being said, or maybe some clashing too. That being said, I'm very happy that he's at least coming back for one race. I just hope he does not have any issues in the Foxers booth here this weekend at Bristol Dirt. So anyway, that's today's long NASCAR and Motorsports video. I want to thank you guys for watching. Please subscribe to the channel, notifications to be notified when a video does go live on my channel. Follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and support me on Patreon as well. Let's get over that and comment your thoughts on today's video. What are your thoughts about Darrell Waltrip returning to the Fox Sports booth? Do you think he'll do well or not? Let me know in the comments below. And what are your thoughts about the Ty Gibbs and Sam Mayer fight? And who do you think's in the right and who do you think is in the wrong? Let me know in the comments below. Not entirely sure what's going to be coming out on the channel tomorrow. I might do the picks video tomorrow on my channel, but just stick around. I may have something coming out, but I'm not entirely sure what's going to be dropping on the channel here. So anyway, like I said, I want to thank you guys for watching today's video, and I'll see you guys next time for great, awesome NASCAR and other motorsports content on the channel like this. Take care, everybody.